I've been hearing it for years. Billy, my bike won't start. Please help me get this thing running. I sold Scott this 1947 Knucklehead motor years ago before anybody wanted Knuckleheads. Nobody cared about them back then. He built this really cool chopper out of it, and he just started to develop problems, started to run bad, burning the plugs black, not wanting to start. So let me run you through how I make one of these things start. I deal with this all the time. Somebody has a motorcycle that runs, all of a sudden it starts running poorly, doesn't want to start, starts harder than it used to. It's usually the same criminals committing the same crimes. It's always one of several different things that I'm going to go through on this motorcycle. So I'm going to check spark. I'm going to check the spark timing. I'm going to check the fuel flow to the carburetor. I'm going to check the carburetor for any air leaks. I'm going to check the carb jetting, carb response, is the carb responding properly, is the float set right. Basic fuel and air delivery to the engine. I'm going to check the compression. You need spark, fuel, and compression to get an engine to run, and the spark has to happen at the right time for the engine to run and start well. So those are the things I'm going to check. I'm going to walk you through step by step how I take a motorcycle that doesn't run at all or did run but started running poorly and bring this back to a one-kick knucklehead. Normally on a motorcycle like this, I would check the battery. This doesn't have a battery. It's Magneto fired only, Magneto ignition, so it creates its own spark, so I don't have to worry about battery. But I turn the fuel on, and I pull the choke up. I lift the enricher, which is the choke, which should give it plenty of fuel and kick. No response at all. I should be getting some kind of response. So what I'm going to do next is pull the air cleaner off and try and hand choke it. I can smell gasoline in the carburetor. Nothing's happening. So I'm going to run through the culprits one by one. First thing I always check is very simple. Is there fuel flowing to the carburetor? So I just pull a fuel line off a tank. Heavy fuel flow. So I know that's not the issue. Another thing I check is if there's fuel getting to the carburetor, is the float bowl filling up? You can see as I turn the carburetor to the side that it is filling and dripping gas. So I know that the float bowl is filling with fuel. So it seems like fuel delivery is not my primary issue. It may be a problem, but it's not my primary issue why it doesn't want to fire or start. I've determined that fuel delivery isn't my primary issue. Now I'm going to check the plugs and check for spark, and here's why I go to the plugs first and not the Magneto ignition. I'll look at the plugs because the plugs will tell me if it's running rich or lean or if it's perfectly tuned. Very rich. You see how black that is? This should be like a coffee with cream brown color, and it's black, so it's very rich. So the plugs are fouled, which is probably part of the problem. So that tells me that the carburetor is getting fuel and too much of it. But I check this before I check the Magneto, because even if the Magneto is making spark, if the plugs are fouled, the plugs may not be sparking. So I'm going to go ahead and put a good spark plug on this, kickstart it, and see if the Magneto fires a plug. And if so, right away, I know my Magneto is firing, I know my plugs are firing, and that problem's solved. If you check the Magneto first, and the Magneto is firing, but your plugs are fouled, you're still not going to have spark at a spark plug. So you have to check the plug first, and then check the Magneto if your plugs look good. I'm going to give you a piece of sage advice here. You can take it, leave it, do what you want with it, but it's free, so you ought to consider it. Auto light. On Harley-Davidson, I always run an auto light spark plug. For the Knucklehead, it's 386. But auto light spark plugs or a Bosch Platinum is the best plug you can run in a Harley-Davidson V-twin. They're really resistant to carbon and oil fouling, so I recommend it. Use whatever you want. This is what I've used for 30 plus years now, and they rarely let you down. I've got a new spark plug, but no spark. Could be the spark plug wire where there's no spark. I'm going to go ahead and roll the engine over, see if there's spark inside the Magneto. I don't see any spark at the points. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean the points out with this piece of fine sandpaper. Sometimes dirty points will prevent you from having spark. Still no spark there, and even if it's hard to see sometimes, this is something that kind of can hurt you, but I put my fingers on the coil leads, and if I rolled it over, and now I got a spark that time, it shocked me, so there's a light spark there. So I probably have dirty points or a bad condenser. So what's happening right now is the Magneto is only firing on the rear cylinder, and a bunch of things can cause that to happen. There can be moisture inside the Magneto. The condenser could be bad, which could cause that. I'm going to go ahead and pull the mag unit out. I have the narrow lobe on the Magneto facing me now, and you know I've explained this before in some of my other videos, so you can go back and watch those. But there's a narrow lobe here and a wide lobe on the back side of the Magneto cam, which opens the points. I marked the narrow lobe and marked the Magneto points plate so that when I put the Magneto back in, it goes back in the same time. As long as I don't roll the engine over while I have the Magneto out and get it back into the same timing it was, and eliminate timing as a factor in what may have been causing it to run poorly. But the lack of spark here is definitely the culprit. I loosened the Magneto head from the base to get it out. Otherwise, I'd have to pull the exhaust, pull the intake manifold, pull the top engine mount, loosen the push rods, and pull the front cylinder head to get this Magneto out. So now that I've got the head out, I can spin it and figure out why only the rear cylinder is firing. Okay, so the Magneto ignition isn't firing. This is the coil, this is the points, this is the condenser, this is the breaker cam, and underneath the breaker cam, it's hard to see down in there, but is the armature rotor. And it's not firing. Let me show you how I test it. I take a cordless drill and I put a bolt in it. The hex head of my bolt will fit in the female hex receptacle on the bottom of the Magneto rotor. And then I spin it clockwise, which is the direction the Magneto would go. And it should spark every time. It's just simply not, it's misfiring. It's only firing on the rear lobe where I have the black mark right there that's opening the cam. You see it open and close. The one with the black mark is the only one that's ever sparking, which is the rear cylinder. The front cylinder isn't firing at all, so that means there's something wrong with the armature. The magnets have a really strong feel. When I rotate it, I can feel them, so it's not the magnets, it's definitely the armature windings. So this Magneto, you can put a new armature in it, but I'm not even gonna waste my time. You can see how it's misfiring there. That lightning spark should be going across it constantly. Okay, to set Magneto points gap, which is right here between these two points contacts, I set the points on the narrow lobe, which is the front cylinder lobe, and put my feeler gauge in between the contacts. Now, you want your gap to be 14 to 16 thousandths of an inch for a Magneto point set. So I've got a 15 thousandths feeler gauge, and it's in and out real sloppy. And now I've moved it, and I put my feeler gauge in, and there's friction on the feeler gauge, but not too much, which lets me know that my gap is in the range that I need to have it. Okay, here's the replacement Magneto in place. I've got it installed roughly in the same position as the other one was. I'm sure it would run if I went to kick it right now, but I'm gonna go ahead and do the timing on this. I've done it before a couple times. I'll put links below to those videos, but I'll go ahead and show you again how you time a knucklehead, panhead, generator, shovelhead Magneto to a Harley-Davidson 45-degree V-twin. Okay, the spark plugs are out. I go ahead and pop off this front intake pushrod tube cover. Yeah, I'm gonna mark my pushrod with a dot just so you can see the movement of it. I'm gonna roll the engine over so the intake pushrod opens and closes, and as it closes, that means my front cylinder is getting ready to go on the compression stroke, which is where I want to time my ignition. So there goes opening the intake valve on the front cylinder, closing it. And so here's my timing hole where I can roll my flywheels around and find my front cylinder advance mark. So I'm going to roll the wheels forward. There should be a vertical line coming in that window. There it is. I don't know if you can see that. It's marked 35 on either side of the line, 3 on one side, 5 on the other, which is 35 degrees before top dead center. That's what it stands for. But that's right where I want to fire my front cylinder spark plug. As I mentioned to you before, there's a narrow lobe and a wide lobe on the cam that opens and closes the points. So with the engine set right where I have it with the front cylinder advance mark, if I roll the magneto, that's clockwise, that's retarding the timing, and if I roll it counterclockwise, that's advancing timing because I'm going against the rotation of the cam. I'd want to have my points just opening as I roll into my full advance position. Right now, I'm way beyond that point, so I'm going to pull the magneto out. I'm still not in the right position, so I'm going to roll my cam around a little bit more clockwise to get into position for that. I think you can see right here, you can see as I start to go, it opens my points right there. And so there's my point. Right when I pull in my full advance, my points are just starting to open with my timing mark where I want it. Good timing, looks good. I'm gonna go ahead and set it up like this. Okay, I got the magneto changed out. It's making spark. So I'm always gonna stick to my story on this. If you've got spark, fuel, and compression, and the spark is happening at the right time, your engine will run. Well, I've got spark, I timed the magneto, I showed you how I did that, so now I'm gonna check my compression. I know it has some compression, but I think some of the valves are a little bit tight, so I'm gonna go ahead and check the valve adjustment now. All right, valve adjustment. I already adjusted the front intake valve push rod when I was timing the motorcycle because I had that off, so I'm gonna do the other 3 now. I'll do the front exhaust, rear exhaust, rear intake. Use my clothespin trick on these that I've showed you before. And there's close. And this one's a little bit loose. It's spinning too easy. It shouldn't spin that freely, so I'm going to tighten it up a little bit, and that one will be done. Boom, that one's done. Okay, now on the rear, I'm gonna let the intake open and close, and that means both of them are gonna be closed when that one comes down, because that's gonna be on the compression stroke where both valves should be closed. So this rear intake is too tight. That's probably where I was losing a little bit of compression. I'm gonna loosen that one a little bit. And then check the exhaust. The exhaust is way too tight. And that's probably where the big problem was coming from in this thing. Yeah, that rear exhaust push rod was so tight that that valve was never closing and was one of the tuning issues that was going on with this thing. Besides the fact that the carburetor was rich and the intake manifold was leaking and all those things. So this comes with experience. Hold the big wrench up top where you want it. Hold the push rod tube up and tighten the jam nut at the same time with oil on your fingers. It takes time to learn it, but going on 4 decades of doing this, I've gotten pretty good at it. Same with putting these push rod clips back on. Something that comes with time. I probably shot 1 million of them across the shop floor in the last 35 plus years, but not anymore. Okay, the push rods are adjusted. So now we've got compression, we've got spark, we got spark timing. That's 3 of the 4 requirements. The last one I need is gasoline. Taking the Mikuni off and putting the correct Linkert M35 carburetor on. The carburetor's rebuilt. The manifold have been modified to accept the Linkert. I beat that thing around for a couple hours and bent it to my will and got it fixed. So now the intake manifold works right. I'm gonna go ahead and install the carburetor, hook up the fuel line, hook up the throttle cable, and this thing should fire right to life. I'll have my 4 components: spark, compression, fuel, and spark timing. This is your fuel strainer. It's got a filter in the bottom here. So this is the early type of filter strainer that Harley-Davidson used on their bikes, including the Knucklehead. Okay, Linkert carburetor has 2 needles, 2 jets, the high speed and the low speed. The high speed you want to turn all the way in gently so you don't over tighten the seat, and then go out 2 full turns. So look at these slots. There's a half a turn, 1 full turn, 1.5, 2 full turns. Go all the way into the seat and 3.5 full turns on the low speed needle. There's a half, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5. And those are your initial settings. You're gonna mess with it from there, but that's where you're gonna start. All right, I got my gas on. I'm just gonna hand choke it first to see if I can get some. There it goes. It's wanting to fire. I got my hands wet with fuel. That's a good sign. So I'm gonna close the choke like halfway and see if this thing will start. Got an oil event underneath the bike. The bike is sumped out, which is common with early Harley-Davidsons. Oil bleeds past check valve and the oil pump and fills the bottom end. It's one of the reasons it doesn't want to run. But once that oil pumps out, some of it will go back to the tank, some of it will pump out onto the ground. It'll start to run better. And then I never advanced my timing, so but you can see it wants to run, it wants to start. Obviously what I've done is right, and now it's just a matter of fine-tuning. Okay, I got most of the oil out of the bottom end of Scott's bike. Did a few adjustments to the carburetor, advanced the timing. I got the timing full advanced now. Watch how it starts. So I solved the spark problem by changing the Magneto, changed the Mikuni carburetor to a Linkert, adjusted the valves and got the compression back where it needed to be, and set the timing like I told you. Compression, fuel, and spark will make it run, and it has to be perfectly timed for it all to happen. I've done all 4 of those things. Let's see how it starts.